The silence that followed the shouting was somehow worse. Just moments before, his voice had roared through the mansion, a thunderclap in a cathedral. Arthur Blackwood, a man who built a tech empire, stood in his own ballroom, his face red with a fury that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Every person there, billionaire investors, city officials, the cream of society, was frozen, their eyes jumping from him to the woman who stood before him. Sarah, his maid. She just stood there. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She simply met his gaze while a small puddle of champagne shimmered on the priceless rug between them. The quiet stretched on, thick and heavy, waiting for her to break. Section 1, The Setup. You have to understand, just hours earlier, the Blackwood mansion was a picture of absolute perfection. Arthur demanded it. This wasn't just any party. The annual Blackwood Foundation Gala was a performance, and Arthur was the star. This was the night he reminded the world that he wasn't just a titan of industry, he was a good man, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. The cameras were there, the reporters were ready, and the story was already written. He'd inherited Blackwood Industries from his father, a man known more for his principles than his profits. The elder Mr. Blackwood built the company on integrity, treating his janitors with the same respect he gave his board members. He tried to teach that to his son, but Arthur had bigger ideas. He took the company global, seeing kindness as a weakness in the shark tank of international business. He became the apex predator. So this gala, it was his monument. Before the guests arrived, he prowled through the halls, hunting for any imperfection. A fork out of place, a flower drooping slightly, each was a personal insult. His staff scurried around him, terrified of waking the dragon. And among them was Sarah Johnson. She'd been working there for 6 months. A woman in her 40s with a quiet grace that made her almost invisible in a house that screamed for attention. To Arthur, when he bothered to notice her at all, she was just part of the furniture. He didn't know her name. He didn't know she was taking night classes to become a social worker. He didn't know she was raising 2 kids on her own, teaching them the very dignity he so clearly lacked. But Sarah saw everything. She saw the condescension in his voice when he spoke to his assistants. She saw the fear in the eyes of his executives. And she saw the portrait of his father hanging in the study, whose kind eyes seemed to watch over his son's cold kingdom with a silent sadness. Sarah had actually met the elder Mr. Blackwood once, years ago. He'd made a point to thank every single person on the catering staff, by name. The difference between the father and the son wasn't just a gap, it was a canyon. Section 2, The Humiliation. The night started perfectly. Champagne, music, and Arthur gliding through the crowd, playing the part of the charming, generous host. He was magnetic. He was announcing a new multi-million-dollar community center he was funding, and a reporter was trailing him, capturing every benevolent gesture. The moment it all fell apart was so small, so trivial. Sarah was moving through the crowded room with a tray of champagne. A guest, not paying attention, stepped back and bumped her arm. The tray wobbled. A single glass tipped over, spilling its contents right onto the blueprints for that new community center Arthur had proudly laid out. A gasp rippled through the nearest guests. The champagne bled into the paper, blurring the plans. It was an accident. A simple, forgivable accident. Everyone knew it. But Arthur Blackwood didn't see an accident. He saw a personal attack. A flaw in his perfect production. And the reporter was right there, pen in hand. His smile evaporated. The charming host was gone, and in his place was a tyrant. He zeroed in on Sarah, and the warmth in the room vanished. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Sarah started to apologize. "I'm so sorry, sir, someone bumped into me." "Do you have any idea what these are?" he bellowed, his voice climbing, silencing the entire party. The string quartet trailed off. "This is a promise to this city. And you just drenched it in champagne like it was a cheap coaster." This wasn't just anger, it was a performance of cruelty. He wanted to make an example of her, to show everyone just how powerful he was. This, he boomed, his voice now echoing off the marble, is what happens when you hire people who don't belong here. People with no respect for property, no understanding of what this night means. He gestured wildly at the splendor around them. Look at this room. Do you have any idea what this costs? The caliber of people here. And you stumble through it like you're serving drinks in some dive bar. The humiliation was crushing. He wasn't just firing an employee, he was publicly gutting her of her dignity. The guests stared at their shoes, at their drinks, anywhere but at the scene. The reporter's pen was flying across his notepad. Sarah just stood there, clutching the empty tray, the insults raining down on her. You are incompetent, Arthur finally spat, delivering the final blow. Get your things. Get out of my house. Now. He turned his back on her, fully expecting her to crumble and flee in tears. The entire room held its breath. Section 3, the sentence. But Sarah didn't run. She didn't cry. And she certainly didn't crumble. Instead, she did something no one in that room, especially Arthur Blackwood, could have ever seen coming. She took a slow, deliberate breath. She set the silver tray down on a nearby table, the soft clink echoing in the dead silence. Then she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and looked right at the back of the man who had just tried to shatter her. Her voice, when she spoke, wasn't loud. But it cut through the tension with absolute clarity. It was steady, calm, and filled with a power that money can't buy. Your father would be ashamed to see the man you've become. The sentence just hung there in the air, crackling with electricity. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a clever comeback. It was a statement of fact. A quiet, devastating judgment that flipped the power dynamic of the entire room on its head. In that single moment, she wasn't the maid, and he wasn't the CEO. She was the conscience of a legacy he'd betrayed, and he was just a little boy being reminded of a better man. Section 4, the aftermath. The shock that rolled through the ballroom was almost a physical thing. The smug looks on the faces of Arthur's cronies melted into disbelief. The reporter stopped writing, his pen just hovering over the page. All eyes darted from Sarah to Arthur, whose face had gone from raging red to a ghostly shade of white. Her words had sliced right through his ego and hit something he hadn't felt in years. His father. Suddenly, he wasn't thinking of the legend whose shadow he lived in, he was thinking of his dad. The man who taught him to ride a bike, whose workshop smelled of sawdust, the feel of his hand on his shoulder. He could almost hear his father's voice, "Son, you can build the tallest building in the world, but if you have to tear people down to do it, you're living in the basement." The opulent room, the glittering guests, the ruined blueprints. It all suddenly felt so cheap, so hollow. Sarah's one sentence had been a mirror, and the reflection it showed him was hideous. He wasn't a titan, he was a bully in a $1,000 suit. The spell was broken. His guests, once his captive audience, now looked at him with a mix of pity and disgust. A major donor, a woman who knew his father, just shook her head in disappointment. The mayor took a subtle step away. The investor he'd been wooing was already on his phone, likely killing a deal. The image he had spent a lifetime building was demolished by 11 simple words. Sarah didn't stick around to watch. Her work there was done. With that same quiet grace, she turned, walked through the stunned crowd, and vanished. She didn't have to slam the door. The silence she left behind said it all. The party was over. People started making quiet excuses, desperate to leave the toxic air of the room. Soon, Arthur Blackwood was standing all alone, haunted by the ghost of his father and the unbreakable dignity of the woman he'd failed to break. Section 5, The Reckoning. The next morning, the Blackwood Gala incident was everywhere. The reporter's article wasn't about philanthropy, it was about breathtaking hypocrisy. He didn't need to add much commentary, He just wrote down what Arthur had said, and ended with Sarah's now famous sentence. It went viral. People latched onto the story. Sarah Johnson, the invisible maid, became an overnight symbol of quiet courage. She was a hero, not because she was secretly a long-lost princess, but because she was a normal person who spoke a profound truth to an untouchable man. For Arthur, the empire began to crack. The company's stock stumbled. The board called an emergency meeting to deal with the reputational damage. The city announced it was re-evaluating the community center partnership. The Blackwood name, once a symbol of power, was now a meme for arrogance. But all of that was nothing compared to the war raging inside of him. He locked himself in the mansion, roaming the empty, opulent rooms that now felt like a prison. He kept hearing her words, over and over. He'd torn people down his whole life. They had always cowered. Why didn't she? He found himself in his father's study. He ran a hand over the worn leather of his father's chair. He pulled a random book from the shelf, and an old photograph fell out. It was from a company picnic, decades ago. His father was in the middle of a crowd, laughing, his arms slung around a mechanic. He looked happy. Connected. Arthur looked up at the portrait of the man he'd spent his life trying to surpass, and realized he didn't know how to be him. Sarah's words weren't just an indictment, they were a question. Who had he become? He had all the power in the world, but a woman with nothing had just shown him that he was completely bankrupt where it mattered. A week later, he knew he had to find her. This wasn't about PR anymore. He had to apologize. It wasn't easy. The agency that hired her refused to give out her information. For the first time, Arthur had to do something himself. He drove to her last known address, a modest apartment building miles away from his world. It felt like a foreign country. Finally, after digging through old files, he found an emergency contact for her sister. His hand trembled as he made the call. He explained who he was, his voice stripped of its usual authority, and just asked if he could please speak to Sarah. After a long pause, her sister gave him an address. "It's a community center," she said, her voice cold. "She's there on Saturdays. Don't you dare cause a scene." Section 6, The Apology and Resolution. The community center was loud, vibrant, and messy. Everything his mansion wasn't. Kids were painting, seniors were playing cards, it buzzed with life. Arthur stood in the doorway, feeling like an alien. Then he saw her. She was in a little library nook, sitting with a young girl, patiently helping her sound out the words in a book. Sarah was smiling, a real, warm smile that lit up her whole face. She looked up and saw him. The smile didn't vanish, but her eyes grew cautious. She excused herself and walked over. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice even. All the speeches he had practiced disappeared. All he had left was the ugly truth. "Sarah," he started, his voice cracking. It was the first time he'd ever used her name. I came to apologize. What I did, it was unforgivable. Cruel. Wrong. There's no excuse." He looked at her, searching for something. Forgiveness? Maybe just understanding. "Your words, they were true. My father, he would have been ashamed. I became someone I don't even recognize." Sarah just listened, her expression unreadable. She wasn't giving him anger, but she wasn't giving him an easy way out, either. "I didn't say it to hurt you, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "I said it because I hoped you might remember him. I catered an event for your father, a long time ago. He taught me that dignity isn't about what's in your bank account. It's something you're born with, and something you have a duty to see in other people." She glanced around the bustling room. This is what he cared about. Helping people. Not for a photo op, but because it's the right thing to do. Arthur looked at the chaos, the life, the connection in that room. He saw more real wealth there than in his entire estate. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I lost my way. I was so busy building an empire, I forgot to build a life." He told her his plan. He was selling the mansion. He was restructuring the foundation to fund this center and others like it. No galas, no publicity. Just help. Sarah nodded slowly. "That's a start." And that was all she said. She wasn't there to congratulate him for finally doing the right thing. Her gift wasn't forgiveness, it was a mirror. It was up to him to fix the man he saw in it. Conclusion. Arthur Blackwood didn't transform overnight. Redemption doesn't work that way. But he started. He showed up at the community center, not as a CEO, but just as Arthur. He started mentoring kids. He changed his company from the inside out. He learned to listen. He learned the names of his cleaning staff. He never saw Sarah again. She finished her degree and moved away, continuing her own quiet work of making the world a little better. She never wanted fame for the night she brought a titan to his knees. She didn't need it. Her power was never about being seen, it was about seeing the truth. It's a story that reminds you that real strength isn't about how loudly you can shout, but about the quiet integrity of your character. It shows that sometimes, one true sentence is more powerful than a billion-dollar fortune. And that you should never, ever underestimate the person cleaning the floors. They might just have the clarity to clean up your entire world. Call to action. So, what do you think? Can a single moment, a single sentence, really change a person that much? Let us know what you think down in the comments. And if this story moved you, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories that remind us of the incredible power of dignity and respect. Thanks for watching.